This is Michelle. My pronouns are she, her.
Hey, this is Tracy. My pronouns are she, they.
And welcome back to the Disruption Podcast, where we have disruptive conversations about big, bold change. Thanks for listening. We are really excited for all of you listening today to dig in with us as we talk to our guest. Our esteemed guest who has such a range of experience and so many cool things to talk about. But it's going to be hard, I think, to confine this conversation to a little bit of focus. But as we've already joked, it just means that we'll have to get them back on for another conversation, or maybe 10. All right, so without any further ado, in this episode, Tracy and I are joined by Calen Ann Otto. Their pronouns are they, them. Calen is a queer, anti-speciesist travel blogger who explores the big, wide world on a very small budget. After completing a solo trip across the entire USA at the age of 19 with only $300 and a bike, Calen discovered that there are so many alternative ways to travel that cost less than what we would all traditionally assume. And also that there are apparently a lot of brave ways to travel that I'm looking forward to tapping into. Inspired by their love of meeting strangers and sharing their incredible stories, Calen created the UnrulyTravel blog. Highly recommend, super cool content. Calen shares photos, videos, articles, and podcast episodes from their unique travels in hopes of inspiring others to get out and really grow. Calen has been to 5 continents, 35 states, 20 national parks, and more than 20 countries as a vegan, and is passionate about doing the least amount of harm wherever they go. Hopefully, they will tell us about their recent trip to Ecuador, which I believe they just got back from and are, recuperating from a little bit too. Yeah. They wrote and published The Art of Unruly Travel on a Budget, a travel guidebook to make travel more accessible to all. So as you can tell, I was not overestimating, how incredible Calen is and how much we're looking forward to this conversation. So welcome, Calen. We're super glad to have you.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I love the whole idea of it, and you're both awesome. So I'm so excited for whatever we're going to talk about today.
We didn't tell them what we're going to talk about, did we?
No, we're going to tease that up because I think first what I really want to hear about is a little bit of the personal connection. So I've just had the pleasure of really meeting Calen, getting to know them, which I feel like, we've done in the span of a good 10 or 15 minutes. But I want to hear about your relationship, Tracy and Calen, with each other.
Well, I just have to say, I love Calen. Badass. It's so great to see you, badass. But I met them at the Women's Travel Fest. I guess it's been, I don't know, has it been like 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
I think so. Time is like, I don't know what's happening. So I think so.
I can't remember. And then COVID was in there somewhere and disrupted, the timing. So it's really hard to figure out timing when COVID was in the middle of everything. Yeah. But I met Calen along with some other Gen Z badass influencers at this Women's Travel Fest and other solo travelers where I was like, oh my God, these, what they were doing. And it's just spectacular. I'm so impressed over and over again by this generation, but they're full of courage, and they're just, I don't even think there's words to describe Calen. And certainly we had an immediate connection, and we were connecting about safety. These Gen Z solo travelers were wanting to talk to me about safety. And, I had heard, you hear over and over again that Gen Z doesn't care about safety. So I just went up to them and I'm like, so tell me.
Is it true?
Is it true? I know that you care about safety. So help me convince everybody else. Is it true? Yeah. And, they had some great insights into that. And I think that's other things that we can talk about too, is safety around solo traveling and how this generation views safety, probably on another podcast. But we also connected on just a deeper level, I think. And, they can correct me if I'm wrong, but really just connected in being, two queer people and living in that community and connecting on that level too, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit today. But I have just been, also, I invited Calen to come to the Safety Summit when I held a Safety Summit for teams, and they spoke on a panel and did such a fantastic job there too. But I think the world of Calen. So I'm so
thank you, Tracy.
I saw that panel and I was fangirling from afar before you even
Thank you. Well, thank you, both of you. And I totally feel the same about you, Tracy. I feel like when I went to women's travel, it's hard going to a women's travel fest sometimes if you're like, I'm not a woman, but I'm female and I look, people are just going to assume. So I'm always like scanning, like, where are the queer people at? And I saw Tracy and I was like, yes.
How did you know I was queer?
It's just the senses. It's like spidey senses.
Yeah.
No straight woman has hair like that. I think
exactly.
I think that's what we all have to admit.
100%.
Nobody has. Let me correct you. Nobody has hair like this.
Okay, fair. That's true. I think that's very fair.
Very accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel the same about you. I was so happy to be able to connect with you and then come speak. And it's really nice because I feel like I just hear so many bad things about my generation from other people. And you're like, you came in with an open mind and you're like, how do you actually feel about this? And like, cheer us on and support us and give us opportunities, which is huge because, you just don't find that often. So yeah, I love you.
Well, I'm a huge fan of the generation, and I believe it's the generation of change. And I want to do everything I can, and I know Michelle feels the same way, to empower you, share wisdom, give the generation tools to continue disrupting in this space, because it is the generation of disruption. I truly believe that, and it's already happening. So,
to give you that platform too, right? Like to elevate the voice so that everyone can hear really the passion, the genuine care, right? And then again, that disruptive spirit that I think just flows. So super cool.
Yes.
Yeah. So speaking of disruption, Calen, what does disruption mean to you?
Oh God. Disruption has kind of become my life, but not in like a way that like I tried to do it, where you like try to make it your thing. I feel like from a young age, I was just doing things differently than some other people. And the world just can't seem to handle that on so many levels. So just by being myself or other people being themselves, they are disrupting, whether they're meaning to or not. So I feel like there's just been this passive disruption, that I've been doing. And there's also like active disruption where you can take action and you mean to disrupt others and disrupt the social norms. So yeah, for me, disruption is just kind of trying to wake up the people around you, whether it be in a loving, soft way or loud in your face way, but just trying to stop whatever is happening that's not, good for everybody, that's not nurturing everybody, and be like, hey, there's another way to do this. So I'm a big fan of disruption.
I love that. It's, really rooted in just trying to wake people up. What a great way to describe that.
And I'll also add that I love being disrupted. Like if I am doing something that harms someone else, or I'm doing something that hurts the planet, or I'm doing something, that is harmful, please disrupt me, That's why I am the person I am today, because I'm open to listening to what people have to say, even if I'm doing something wrong, which is not always easy to do, and I'm not perfect, but yeah, big fan of disruption all around. Disrupt me, let me disrupt you. Like, I think it's great.
I love that you use the word nurture in your response, Calen. So cool, because I think so often...
That's a Virgo, not to interrupt her, but the Virgo's like, oh my God.
It's like my heart. Yes,
like,
it's true.
I love it.
Yeah. I mean, but so often, right? And you know, honestly, not to speak for Tracy, but, you know, knowing a lot about her journey and our collective journey together, so often people, I think, look at disruption as, you know, kind of that second side of it, as you described, right? A force, like a power. I'm going to come in and I'm going to, like, you know, shake it all up. Yeah. And I do think that there's a real nurturing quality and aspect to disruption for good, you know, leading with care and compassion. And as you say so eloquently, you know, doing things that really, you know, embrace and allow growth for our earth, for our people, you know, and really, you know, kind of create that community and environment. So I love that.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out too. Sometimes I say things and I'm like, yeah, I really meant that. I really felt that. I just had that moment. Because for me, the disruption comes from a place of care and love. Like, I want everyone to be well rested, as happy as they can be, as healthy as they can be. I want, you know, the planet to be doing the same, to be thriving. Like, I want everyone to thrive genuinely. And so it seems to me that sometimes the only way that you can create that reality that's not already there is disruption. So it comes from a loving place. It doesn't come from a hateful place. It doesn't come from this place of like, you're terrible, you need to change. It comes from this place of like, I can see a different future where we all thrive. So let's stop what's happening now and work towards getting there.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's what's, you know, the word disruption sometimes scares people. And I think it's important that they know that is true, that disruption to us is coming from this place of love and care, deep love and care for people, and deep love and care for the earth. And it is where it's grounded in. That's where the root of disruption for us is. So, you know, I love that you're also coming from that same place. And I think that's where we connect with others, is in that space of deep love and care for people. And it is connected to disruption in our journeys. So, but I love that. And I love the concept of nurture in there too. And I know Michelle does. So I also have to give her a hard time about the Virgo, because I love it when her Virgo comes out. So.
It's just, you know, like my aura all around is like just a Virgo.
You know, disruptions with Capricorn. You know, when you're a Capricorn and you're a disruptor, that's where people are like, oh, Capricorn. You know, it's like they don't see us as nurturers, even though we do have a cuddly side. So.
That's the thing too, that I think why I love you so much, Tracy, is because you seem on the exterior like, I don't want to say tough, but like, you know, you can hold your own. You're going to defend people.
And protector. Yes.
You like that protector energy, but like you're so nurturing and loving, and it's from this place of love. So that's why, I'm so excited to talk about this with both of you.
Oh, I'm so glad other people see that side of her.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah. I tell people that. I'm like, you got to get to know me a little bit. But yes, I do have that initial presence of strength, and it can be intimidating to some people. But I'm a fighter for people. And there is that side of me that rises up, that's fearless, and like, I am not going to stop until I, destroy this.
Yes.
But I do have that side, and that's the side that sometimes I think people don't see. But once they get to know me a little bit, they do see it. So it's there. But let's talk about some of the space that, you are being passionate about disrupting around gender and sexuality. And certainly I can connect to this. And I know Michelle can connect to it too. But, I always ask people, tell me your story, right? Because stories are powerful. They're so powerful because there's people listening that are going to connect, and they're somewhere along their journey. Who knows where they're at on their journey? But for me, it was always hard because nobody was talking about what I felt like I was feeling or what my journey was. And so when you finally connected with somebody, or you heard a story that was similar to yours, it made, it created a space where you felt seen and you felt heard and you felt like, okay, there are other people who are like me, but also have a similar journey, because journeys are so different in how you discover kind of your authentic self, your authentic gender identity. And for me, it certainly was a journey, and it was a journey that took some time. I remember it was like steps, it's like, okay, you realize I'm not straight. I knew that, I'm gay. But then there was this other journey, and the other journey was connected to gender. And so what was that spark that made you realize that you didn't fit into that standard binary gender expression? And can you tell us that story? And then, how has it continued to kind of shape and change over the time frame? I know I've been around a while, so I just think it's fantastic when I see young people like you who are finding that space much quicker and embracing it, versus it took me, some time, over a period of time. And I think it's still a process for folks. But tell us a little bit about your story, and how you came to where you are today.
Yeah. So regarding gender, I had to think on this the other day, because I was like, it's like kind of thinking, when did this whole thing start? But it's like not a whole thing, because we all experience gender. So it was just like, when did it come to the forefront of my mind? And when I was in elementary school, actually, I decided that I was a boy. I just decided one day, and I refused to wear. I don't like girl clothes. For anyone who's listening, I'm doing the air quotes, because that's not a thing. But I decided that I wasn't wearing traditional, what people see as girl clothes. I was only going to wear boy clothes, and I really did. I was just like, I am a boy. Everyone is not seeing me correctly. I want to participate in these activities that only boys get to participate in. I felt like, I don't know, I guess I gradually grew into it through my own interests, but I felt like, because of, everyone told me I was a girl, that I couldn't do these things that I want to do. I really wanted to play football, and I'm not a sports person, but I wanted to play football so bad. And, my favorite color was orange. And there's this yearbook photo of me wearing, oh God, it's embarrassing, wearing this bright orange muscle shirt with a cap that's with flames on it. And that was my favorite outfit. I just loved it, and I just
see that photo, by the way.
We need to use that for the cover art for this particular podcast. I love it.
Yes, that should probably be on my blog too. Just when people come in, it's welcome, me making a muscle or something.
Love it.
So yeah, I didn't know anything about gender either. I didn't have my parents weren't talking about it. It wasn't a concept to me. It was just something internally that said I'm a boy, and I don't really care about these gender norms. I want to do what I want to do. And, my parents were just okay, you can wear what you want to wear. I wasn't allowed to play football. I'm still kind of upset about that, Mom. But they didn't make a big deal out of it. They were just sure, wear what you want to wear, do what you want to do. But then at school, I got teased for the clothing choices that I had, and I guess just defying gender norms. And those kids didn't know any better, right? Because I don't think anyone in my class at that time knew much about gender. Our parents weren't talking about it. So I kind of got teased out of that. And people would always say oh, it's just a phase. But that kid wearing that flaming cap still lives inside of me. And that never went away. It wasn't just a phase. It was just me recognizing that that gender is created by humans. And then there's all these rules in place. And from a young age, I was I don't like that. I don't have to participate, right? And so I kind of went back to just being what I was expected to be, whatever, wear girl clothes, do girl things like that. And by the time I got to high school, I remember a couple times being am I actually straight? And then I'd be oh God, that's such a terrible thought to think. Of course I am. Oh my God, stop it, Calen. So, that was a thing that entered my mind only a couple of times. I mean, I grew up in a really small town in Ohio, and we were not a diverse crowd. And so it wasn't something that was talked about in a positive light. And then, honestly, when I ended up going vegan my senior year of high school, it changed my life, honestly, in more than one way. And the way that it relates to gender is that I ended up getting into animal rights activism, like pretty hardcore. And that's an alternative space. So there was all these different types of queer people, like this whole diverse group of people, like this whole diverse group of outcasts and disruptors and activists and people who were just, punks living how they wanted to live. And so there were finally words to put to my feelings around gender and sexuality. And I was finally in a space where they're like, yeah, it's not a big deal. You can like girls, you can like whoever you like it's a safe space here. So it wasn't until I was in that space until I had like mental space to be like, okay, well, let's take a second and try to strip away all the stuff you've been told about who you are and who you love and what your gender is. And when I gave myself that space and the people around me were really nurturing that, like, yes, you should learn about that. And here are some different things you can play with. Did I come to the conclusion, like, yeah, I am non-binary. I am living outside of these gender binaries. And it's not like, for me, it's not, for some people it is, but for me, it's not like a scale, like man, woman, boy, girl, and you go back and forth. For me, it's just like outside of that. It's like, I just don't want to even be on that scale. I just want to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
I just want to be who I want to be. And then I also realized that I was pansexual. Like, I'm just attracted to different groups of people. And I'd say at this point in my life, I'm more attracted to like people who visibly look queer, like maybe trans people or non-binary people. And so I finally have been really stepping into that space over the years. And if it wasn't for that, honestly, like the vegan community being so nurturing about that, I don't think that I would have really taken the time to focus in and learn about that. And then, over the years, two of my very best friends are trans, and they're also activists, and they're very outspoken, and they're so intelligent. So just from the people around me, I've been able to learn more about language and other people's experiences. And yeah, so now I'm at this point where I'm thinking about it a lot and talking about it and trying to help other people, like, even think about their own gender, because I think so much violence and suffering comes out of just the ignorance. Like, people don't actually understand what gender is, and they don't understand their own gender, but they're telling other people that their gender is wrong. So just trying to like kick that in the butt and be like, wait, let's educate you about gender. Let's have you examine your own gender, and then you can have a space at the table to talk to other people about their genders. So yeah, I'm constantly learning more in this space, but I do see what you were saying, Tracy, like younger people, and it's because of everyone else who's come before us, like all the hard work that they've put in. I feel like, it's maybe, I don't know if it's safer at this point, but it seems more accepted, than 20, 30 years ago. And the idea of what gender is like being explored by more people. And so I hear people say sometimes like, oh, the kids just think it's cool. Like, everyone thinks it's cool to use different pronouns now. It's like this new thing. And for me, it's not a new thing. It's always been around. There have always been non-binary people. There have always been trans people and lesbians and all of this. We just have the language for it now, which I think, just makes it easier for people to have conversations around it. And that makes me really happy.
I love that. I think the thing that really stood out to me in what you said is the pivotal moment is when you felt nurtured and you felt like there was a community supporting you.
A safe space.
Critical, right? Such a critical component because, and having more people around that are accepting, because that, when I look back, because I have a similar, upbringing growing up in a small town, it was just not, it wasn't talked about. It's certainly a heavily religious community. It also wasn't accepted. And it was me trying to figure it out and felt very alone in that space of trying to figure it out. And understanding too, even though there were terms out there, back in the day when, I was going through this journey myself, it was, the term was just LGBT. And I was there going, I went from one community that had told me all these shoulds, right, into another community that said, well, you should fit in one of these areas. And it was like, well, I kind of fit it, it was like, oh, am I a lesbian, and then it's like, well, I didn't really fit in the lesbian category of sexuality, right? I didn't fit here or there. And I thought, where the hell, I was in between, I was somewhere, and it took me, really accepting myself that, why am I trying to put myself in a definition or a box? And it was connected to my sexuality and my gender, trying to understand, because my gender was fluid and where do I really fit? And that's where, ultimately I really embraced, being queer, because it was like, I'm just a little bit of everything, and I'm in between in a lot of places, and this is what works for me. And I had to accept that was okay. And it was hard because I felt I didn't always feel accepted, even in the community I was supposed to be accepted in, right? And 20, 30 years ago, that was a very hard place to be and a hard journey for me to find my space. And so I love it was nurturing and community as it started to build that really helped me too. And I think you're right that the generations of today have that nurture, that community, and that acceptance more probably than, it's not that there isn't, yes, we still have violence. We still have all these things that are impacting us. But that to me is probably one of the most critical points in creating a more loving, nurturing, and accepting society, is that that may be part of the reason why it has happened for others like you much quicker than it happened for those who we were, making our way 20 years ago, fighting the fight. And I do want, I'm queer. I use the term genderqueer quite often. And I do know that it's a term that is sensitive in the community. Some people don't accept it. It's connected to a negative term that we reclaimed. It's connected to activism. It's very controversial, so it fits me quite well in that way too.
Yeah.
I tend to just be, an activist and controversial in everything I do.
Yeah.
It felt like I finally. It's like I just have to accept the fact that I'm just me and I'm unique in who I am. And I don't fit into these binary norms or categories, and that's okay. And I might have had, Calen, also a muscle shirt at one point.
Yes.
I don't know that I had the flames hat, but I'm kind of jealous because I have
you need one.
You should be.
I love hats, and I kind of want the flames hat, but I might have had a pretty good hat back in the day too,
Yes. And you know what? It's just like silly things like that where you're like, you feel deeply seen by someone else. You're like, you understood the muscle shirt phase.
Right. Oh my God. I love that. Nobody ever understood the muscle shirt phase.
No. And you talking about that sparked my memory, because when I was in that phase, it was so funny. Like the skull cap, the muscle shirt, the gym shorts, like the long, like boy gym shorts.
Yeah.
I wore these platform sandals that were like, they were like this thick, and I clumped around in them in that outfit, like, that people consider really girly. And I just think it shows to like what you're talking about. Like sometimes we don't fit into boxes, and I'm just like, why are these boxes here anyway in the first place? Like it seems like what they mostly do is harm people. So I love that there's new language, because I feel like language is so important that kind of breaks those walls down. And it's just like, oh, you're just queer. You're just out here. Like your gender doesn't fit in a box. Your sexuality doesn't fit in a box. Like, here you go. Just be in this free space.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, like, what strikes me in this part of our conversation is like, and not to challenge necessarily either one of you, but I just don't even want to use the word fit, right? Because I just feel like when you're using that terminology, you're necessarily, I mean, much like you're saying, Calen, right? You're like either in, right, some space that you fit, or you're out of that space. And the way you just put it with just being, right? So like the place where we all fit is just where we are.
Yeah.
You know, it's a little for me. So I've been going through a lot of my own, you know, like personal transformation and journey regarding my own sexuality, and, you know, in some ways how I would define myself in a lot of different spaces and roles that I've held. And like a lot of the analogy that always comes to mind for me that I think kind of fits here, just to, not to use that term maybe in the way I was just challenging, but it's this idea of like, you know, what does authenticity look like? And what does that mean for success for me, right? And so I use that analogy around success, you know, in almost this kind of like ladder, right? I don't want to climb the ladder. Like, I don't want to, you know, step on the person below me because I'm going up. I want to redefine what success looks like, what, you know, true prosperity looks like, what abundance looks like for me. And so in that space, I guess what I'm saying is, right, it's not a definition of where I am in relation to anybody else or any other concept. It's really just, again, like I just am. And I find that now I'm defining my own success by my ability to use my voice, right? And be authentic and be honest. And, you know, and speak my truth, but also be open to conversing with others about their truths. And, you know, and one thing you touched on that I did want us to dig into a bit to help any of our listeners who, to Tracy's pointer, you know, wherever they may be on their journey, is really language, right?
Yeah.
And so here I am challenging, you know, this particular word, and then I go and I use it anyways. And, you know, and then, you know, there are all these kind of words that carry so much power in defining either who we are or where we are or what we are in relation to others. So in the space, Calen, where you're disrupting, right, this, you know, kind of human or man-made gender binary system, these norms, right, and talking about how important language is, do you want to take us through a little bit of like that, I don't know, definitions exercise? Like, what is the language that you find helpful? Like, how do you use language and words to really have this conversation towards openness and acceptance and growth, you know, as you talk to other people?
Yeah, well, I think that's such a great question. I think that, which I'm sure y'all are like very mindful of, like using terms like y'all instead of you guys, different things like that.
I like y'all.
Y'all, see?
It's easy when you're from Oklahoma and Texas to use
That's
y'all.
right.
It's just like comes naturally.
Yeah, just like I started noticing small things in language. Like, for example, saying you guys, when I'm in a room and there's no guys in there. And if we went into a room of guys and we said you girls, they would be so upset. It would be unheard of. So I just started noticing things like that in language where I'm like, okay, wait, this is like so deeply embedded into our culture that we just say these things even if we don't mean them. So for me, I do a lot with language around like making my language more neutral, like how you were saying man-made, human-made, like you said both of them, which both made sense. Just things like that, instead of assuming someone's gender and saying, oh yeah, that guy over there, that woman over there, I'm just like, oh, that person over there. And I just use they for people until I know their pronouns, because that's just a more neutral thing to do. So I guess I've just examined my own language and tried to make it as open for other people as possible. So if you're like, what do I say instead of this thing? It's just like, how do you make it more open? How do you give people space with your language to just be who they are in terms of their gender or sexual identity? How do you just make it like an open space where they can fill in the blank themselves? Yeah, so people get very worked up about language, like, oh, I'm so nervous, I don't know what to call these people, I don't know what to say. And it's like, chill, you know, we're all human. Go back to that human level and say something that kind of gives freedom to everyone else, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it makes total sense. And I probably should insert that when I use the term man-made, what I was really referring to is the patriarchy. Let's be honest.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying that makes so much sense, because it's literally man-made.
Right, literally at that point, right?
Yeah.
Literally.
No, but I think that's beautiful. Like one thing, and I'm sorry, Tracy, I don't mean to interrupt, but like one thing I just want to piggyback off of Calen is, in that space where you provide such a beautiful view, right? It's just like, let's create a space where people are just people and can be the people that they are. How do you, if you've had the experience or ever wanted to, like, how do you support that person who's making the assumption, right? Who's potentially looking at you and assuming certain things or certain pronouns or certain identities? I anticipate, just knowing you for the brief time I have, there's a kind, compassionate, very gentle way that you may help that person, kind of see a broader perspective and grow a little bit in that space. Like, what are some of your tips and tricks or recommendations?
Yeah, I think it's hard because we all have different levels of privilege, right? So for me, people will just assume I'm a woman, and if I'm like, no, I'm non-binary, they're not going to like come after me because, just by looking at me, my gender is not super apparent as it is for some other people who are trans maybe, or, other marginalized groups. So for me, it's like, personally, it's like this ranking system in my brain. Like, do I care enough about this relationship to have this conversation with this person? Because if it's a one-off at the grocery store or a family member that is just, I don't really care about that relationship and they're never going to get it anyways, then I'm just like, you know what, I can just be annoyed and I'm going to save my energy. But if it's someone that I really care about, they probably already have some sort of concept of what gender is. And if they don't, it's really like saying, which I'm not good at yet. I'm really working on it, and I can do it sometimes, but sometimes I can't. Just saying like, oh, hey, I noticed that you use she, her pronouns for me. I just want to let you know my pronouns are they, them, and I'm non-binary. Maybe you already know what that is, but if you have any questions, you can ask me. And sometimes it's really taxing when people are like, oh yeah, I do have questions. And it's okay to be like, you know what, I'm going to send you this article because someone already wrote this, someone already explained it, and you can read it on your own time. So I think the tip really is like gauging your safety levels, gauging how much energy you want to put out there, and is this person like the right person to give that energy to? And then also putting it on other people to educate themselves, because you can't be the educator for everyone in your life. That's exhausting, especially when they don't get it, or they didn't really care. They just were kind of, responding to you. They didn't actually want to learn about it. That gets very disheartening. So I assume that the people in my life who really, really care about me and they really love me and they really want to see me for me, if I send them that article, they'll read it and they'll like take it to heart. And if they don't, I mean, that's where the relationship starts to veer a little bit for me, because this is such an important thing to me and it's such an important thing in the world. So yeah, I think people just being easy on themselves too, because I kick myself so many times if someone misgenders me and I don't say anything. And then later I'm like, oh God, I should have said something. And it's like, it's okay. We're all learning. Like, eventually I'll be at the place where I can just say, hey, right away. Yeah. And I'm not there yet. So I think it's also being gentle with yourselves.
What I loved hearing about that is, first you start with self-care and taking care of yourself and asking yourself, like, we can't put energy into every single time. I don't know how many times people call me sir, or how many times people call me ma'am. Like, it just happens so much. It's like, how much energy am I going to put into every time that happens, or every time, somebody is, and when I say, just there's so much ingrained into the culture, and it's overwhelming sometimes, right? So kind of gently educate somebody, or knowing their intention may be harmful and they don't deserve a gentle education, and I love that, too. Yes, we need to put it on others to educate themselves. And so love the mention of the article. Yeah. I don't know what article you're referring to, but that might be something we can post in the show notes as well, for folks.
Yeah, if people have if people are like, what's non-binary? I Google what is non-binary. I find an article I like and I send it to someone, because they could have done that themselves.
Well, I agree. I think it's really important for, people to take on just getting out there and educating, because what they need to hear is it is heavy for people like us to be trying to educate everybody who comes to us and, doesn't get it or doesn't understand the community, or some person coming to me and saying, you look like a man, and I agree with the family. My great-grandmother would say that all the time. Like, why do you look like a man? At some point, I got tired of explaining to her why I look the way I look, and can you just accept me for the way I am? But it was not going to happen. So it's like, at some point, I have to probably reduce my exposure to the people who are unwilling to educate themselves and unwilling to learn. And so what I want the audience to hear is it's a lot. It's a lot, right? It's a lot for us to try to take the time to go and educate yourself. And I also love the openness of, just really creating a space for trying to simplify it for people, where it's like, just start from the space of being a human and being open and using neutral terms. I think that's a great recommendation as well.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, when Michelle asked me about words earlier, a solid example for someone to change their language is I'm not married, but if I did tell someone I'm married or I have a partner, they'll automatically be like, what's your husband's name? Right? We do that to people. What's your husband's name? Assuming that I'm married, assuming that it's to a man, all of these things. So if we can take that assumption out, that automatically changes your language. What's your partner's name? I don't know if you're married. Doesn't really matter. I don't know their gender. I just want to know about your partner. So I think that is helpful on both sides. Tracy, if someone approached you and they just said oh, you look great today, instead of being you look like a man, they just took that whole assumption out of there, and they're just seeing you for who you are, and so on both ends, that's so helpful. So I wanted to throw that tip in there for people.
And I go back to that I misgendered Calen in a bio one time with our summit, and I felt so bad because that's something that I don't normally do. We're not perfect. I've spent 51 years on this earth, and there's a lot that's ingrained in us from our culture, societal views, beliefs that I have to correct myself. I have to even, sometimes the initial thought will be the thought that I need to shift before it comes out my mouth. So even though I've been in this community, lived in this community, I'm a part of the community, the queer community, that I also make mistakes. And that's why I love, what you said earlier is, I want people to disrupt me when I do something, or, I need some support. I need some understanding. And, I appreciated the approach that you took with me. And so I think that it's good for people to hear that even the people who are trying to do the education or members of the community, we fall or make a mistake at times. So
yeah, it's impossible to be perfect and know everything and always say the right thing. So I think it's giving each other grace when that happens, and then just mental note, okay, this is something I need to work on. And then, we can all move on, and we can just, see each other for how we are, apologize when we mess up, and then just do better when we're asked to.
That's such a, to use the word that you just stated, such a graceful, and then taking us back to that nurturing space, right? Way, I think, Calen, it sounds like you approach that space with other people. And I think what we'll want to do is often give our listeners some pretty concrete thoughts, tips, kind of suggestions on how to approach maybe the spaces where we're having these disruptive conversations. There are a whole lot of, points that I'm taking in to make later. I'd like to shift a bit into a space where, we've kind of touched on already, but, much to Tracy's point, right? Looking at the person on the other side of the conversation, of the equation, of the interaction. I don't know that everyone always has the best intentions, or you're going to run across, right? Some of those people who very clearly are not wanting to approach you from a place of self-education, self-awareness, good intention. And so as we were kind of gearing up for this conversation with you, one of the things that you said in the context of gender being like literally human made, right, is the idea that there's really been a lot of real world harm that comes from, and I'll just use your phrase, right, violently enforced gender norms.
Yeah.
And that really struck me. Again, to me, it makes me think of, of much of this long historical perspective that humans, nay, the patriarchy, if you will, has really created and then enforced for power structure. And I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't want to assume, right, that is that's what you mean in any way. But I'd love to hear more from you about what you mean by violently enforced gender norms and how that plays into the context of where I also hear you wanting to create safe and open spaces for people to be and to grow and to just come into greater understanding of each other.
Yeah.
So it was like a 14 pause question.
I was like, I might have to ask you about the other part of that. No, but I totally agree. Like you assumed, you captioned, like pulled it all together correctly. That's, totally how I feel. And when I say like violently enforced gender norms, I mean, like literally like, people are killed because they're trans. People are killed because they're gay. People are like actually physically harmed in the real world because of this thing that's up here, gender, that was man-made, human-made, that like, I don't want to say it doesn't exist because there's so much harm in the world that comes out of it, but like we can't touch it. It's not tangible. And so this thing that was created is now having real world effects, even though we can't quite put our finger on it. And so I think that's why it's so important for people to educate themselves about gender, because when we are uneducated and we do make assumptions, there ended up being real world consequences. And, you can see that now with legislation that's being made across this country. Not only are people harming trans youth or queer youth or, adults that are queer, but it also leads to suicide, when people don't feel like they are understood or accepted and they'll never fit in this world. That's how they feel. And it leads to people killing themselves as well. So there are repercussions that come out of gender that really do hurt people. And that's what I mean when I say like violently enforced gender norms, because it's also enforced by the state, by our government. It's not just us doing it to each other. It's also these power structures. So there's so many different ways that it is violently enforced.
Connected to the violence that's happening to the community, and there is real world violence happening. And again, we see it happening. I think about, it just pains me to see all of the bills, the anti-trans bills that are happening across the U.S. and the just misconception, the misunderstanding about gender, about transgender, about, gender affirming care, not understanding what that actually is and all these assumptions that are around it and how damaging it is. And so I think that's the thing that people need to hear is how deeply important this is, because it is connected to real world violence that's happening. And, this at the end of the day, this is violence against human beings. How can anybody stand by and know that there's harm happening to human beings? We should all be involved in trying to reduce that harm and eliminate it. And we all have a role in that. And that role can be one part of that role. One piece of that role is really rooted in language and understanding and education. And that's something that everyone can do.
Well, and so what I was thinking maybe we'd follow up on, and there have been so many beautiful jewels of wisdom, Calen, that you've already offered. But, again, it's some of that solutioning, right? It's what are ways in which we all move forward outside of what fits or what doesn't, and really allow space for people to just be. One thing that I'm very passionate about, I know Tracy's very passionate about, is, and certainly that we're passionate about on this podcast and the conversations we have, is much of what you were saying earlier, where you found a real space for your own personal, understanding and continued evolution, right? It's the idea that in a safe space, we can all truly be the best versions of ourselves. So it's creating those safe spaces, but it's also offering listeners, offering ourselves through these conversations, just like permission to be as well. So for anyone who is on their journey and is, maybe unsure of how they can truly step into their authenticity, what are your thoughts? Like, how would you support that friend, or even, maybe kind of that young person that comes to you that you see potentially so much of yourself in, who may be struggling?
I think just listening to people sometimes is the most powerful, right? Even if we don't understand, even if someone came to you and they're like, oh my goodness, I think I'm gay, I think I'm trans, I think I'm non-binary, I don't know. And even if you don't understand what that means, just listening and hearing that person out, and not always feeling like you have to offer them something back. Sometimes just letting people talk, because that's giving them the space to just be. And even maybe saying like, I don't understand what that means, but I love you how you are, and I'm here to support you. Even just giving people like that verbal support, like I'm here for you and I support you, is huge. And for anyone in that space, because for example, I live in rural North Carolina, and I know that there are some queer kids out here who have a rough time at home because we are in the conservative part of this state, deep south, where there's a lot of really harmful conservative ideas. And so this might be a little off the wall for some people, but honestly, for me, I've found a safe space for gender and sexuality in nature, because nature, when I understood this, like I was like, whoosh, mind blown, world changed. So many people talk about what's natural, right? And they're just like, oh, being gay isn't natural, or whatever they want to say. But if you look at nature around you, it is so queer. Like other animals have, first of all, they don't even have gender because it was created by humans. And then secondly, they have queer relationships or homosexual relationships. So many other animals do, and it's normal. So for me, if that space is not around me with the humans in my life, which is sad, and I wish it was for everyone, sometimes going into nature and just recognizing how queer nature is can be a support system. And then also, if you don't have those people in your life, right? You don't have a Tracy, you don't have a Michelle, where you can have these conversations. Tuning into a podcast where you feel like you're sitting in the room with those people and you're friends with those people, just hearing people, which hopefully this interview can do for other people, hearing people who think like you and feel like you, like Tracy was saying earlier, is so important. It kind of gives you that permission slip to say, I'm valid. I can be who I want to be. And like, there are other people like me, and I may not have that community now, but I will one day.
I tell people, as I was kind of going through that journey, I moved to Arizona, and I said, Arizona healed me. And people were just like, well, what do you mean Arizona healed you? And I'm like, because it's this beautiful outdoor space. It's this native land that I felt so deeply connected to. And I got out in nature, and I was there with nature, and nature helped me feel accepted and feel, normal and all of those things, and feel like it was kind of the same story that you shared. And that's one of the reasons that I love nature. And anytime I'm feeling like I need to be, inspired, encouraged, I'm having a rough time or whatever it is, I go out, whether it's hiking, it's connecting in that space and being in that space. It's where I do a lot of my reflection, journaling, time. And so it truly is a space. I think that's a great recommendation for people who are on this journey that, really getting out there, but people and getting out there and connecting with nature. And I think it brings so much to us, but people, when I say that, people don't really get it. But the people who get it are the people who have had that similar experience, that there's something beautiful about seeing nature and how nature interacts with each other and how animals interact with each other. And we can learn so much from what the earth already has and what it gives to us. So it's a beautiful thing. I love that.
Yeah.
I know. We're going to have to do a podcast on nature being queer. That's not anybody else has done a podcast on nature being queer. We'll do it.
I'm so glad you resonated with that. There's not a lot of people who get that. I'm like, nature is queer. Nature's the original queer.
Let's do it. Because then I think where you really dig in, at least part of my perspective, is into reproductive abilities, which I think is a lot of where the gender binary and so much of this power structure is placed. Looking at some of the more like asexual reproductive aspects in nature is like such a cool concept. To kind of layer into this conversation about how human made the concept that we're layered on really is. So, sorry, that's where I really start to
that's like what is part of what I say nature is queer. Like, there are animals who can reproduce without a partner, or, you know what I mean? It's like not straight. Like, nothing in nature is like straight to me. Like, if you look at literally no two trees are the same. Like, no two things in nature are exactly the same. And I feel like I started thinking about this when I've dealt with different, body issues over the years and body dysmorphia, which is tied into gender. And my partner, because he knows that I'm like so enamored with nature, is like, literally stop hating on your body. Look outside. Look at all these trees. Like, they are curvy. They're all different sizes. Like, they're all different shapes. Like, it's beautiful. Like, see that in nature and then see that in yourself. So I think I've applied the same thing to gender in some ways, and sexuality when it has to do with nature.
I love that. Would your partner want to come on with us too?
Exactly.
No, that's a really beautiful imagery. Often whenever I am, meditating and really trying to kind of come into myself, like the image I see is a tree, right? It's the deeply rooted nature of the structural system.
In this space, in the way we all view gender and the constrictions that this patriarchal society has put on us, and that you have the courage to express yourself, authentically each and every day. There's power in that. There's power when we express ourselves authentically. And I just am just taken aback by your courage. It's so needed. Your story is so needed. It's powerful. You are changing the world. So don't forget that, when you wake up every day, you are changing the world just by being you. And it's beautiful, and absolutely, we are so thankful to have you a part of this. And thank you for your compassion, because it's really rooted in compassion and genuine care for people. And that's how we also really change the world. So, but I think Michelle can kind of close us out, and we'll definitely put links to all of Calen's socials and all that good stuff. But I'll let the Virgo close us out. She does a good job. Making sure we hit everything, because I'll miss something. I don't follow points as
Oh, I don't know that that's true technically necessarily. No, we are really grateful for all of our listeners today. I certainly hope that this, and I believe that this conversation has been helpful, eye-opening, instructive, and that you really see, to Tracy's point, the courage and bravery in which Calen's presents this space, and also just to kind of go back really briefly to a little bit of the, rhetoric or banter around this kind of Gen Z or millennial generation, right? What I find is the people that I'm in conversation with, like you, Calen, also are just in such a place of hope, right? I think there can often be a misplaced maybe assumption or stigma that there's a little bit of, kind of ennui, or that you don't care about anything, or that, you're disconnected from a generational perspective. And I find it to be the exact opposite. So the hope that you've provided in this conversation, I think for all of us and our listeners, has been really cool. Of course, for the rest of our disruptors, we will be back with more disruptive conversations. Many of them apparently will include Calen as putting that list together.
Yes.
But we'll be back in 2 weeks. So you can definitely keep an eye out for the next episode of the Disruption Podcast.
So let's keep disrupting.